Hi, my name is Joe Inslee, and I'm excited to have you back for another episode on my series, Characters in the Bible, Homegirl Edition. Today we get to talk about a very special homegirl who has her very own book in the Bible, known as Esther. Before I jump into the story of Esther, I just have to tell you about this little website called Patreon. Patreon is where people like you go to support people like me. And you give me like $3 a month or something silly just to help support this ministry, because I have to buy technology and lights and set aside time and do all this stuff. And I really want to do it and I love doing it. But it helps me out a lot when people like you go on there and choose to support me just a little bit to help keep the work of the Lord going forward. Speaking of having people like you doing that, I have a special message from a special lady for you.
Hi, I'm Tracy. I'm Joe's wife, and I'm just excited to come on here just for a bit to say a special thank you. We are so excited to thank two very special ladies, Marie from Inspirational by Marie, that's her channel name, and Efa from Efakitu TV. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. Thank you so much. You ladies mean so much to us. Your support means a lot to us, and you're very encouraging.
So all of you who know my wife, Tracy, from her Facebook activity and all the work she does in the YouTube communities, now you have a face to put with the name. And yes, thank you again to Aoife and Marie for your support. It's very encouraging to us. And I'm going to put links to both your channels in the description of this video. So anybody, if you're wondering what awesome Christian ladies look like and do on their channels, you should go check them out. Back to Esther. Esther was alive in 490 BC, which is a long time ago. And on one hand, it was a really great time to be alive, especially if you're one of those people that loves philosophy, because there were some big-time philosophers hanging out at the same time that Esther was alive.
We got Pythagoras, Aristides, and Sophocles.
But on the other hand, it was a terrible time to be alive, especially if you're a Jew, because the Jews are in captivity. They're not like living their best life now. I guess Joel Osteen hadn't started preaching at them yet. So they had to deal with what the actual Bible said. Anyway, it's not a great time to be alive, because the poor Jews are in captivity and they're ruled over by a nation that's not necessarily understanding of a biblical God. Before I get into Esther's awesome, cool story, which you should also probably go read for yourself because it's a great read. It's a cool story. She's an awesome woman, and it's a whole book in your Bible, so you should read it. But before we talk about Esther, we have to talk about her queenly predecessor, Vashti. Vashti's pretty cool, right? The king is having this big party. He's getting drunk with all of his friends, and he decides to do the same thing that men have done for years and continue to do for years, which is objectify his wife. Not a great guy. So he calls out Vashti and he's like, hey, come dance for me and all my drunk buddies. And Vashti is like,
Nah, be a pig. We ain't doing that today.
Vashti could have been beheaded for this. I want you to understand just how big of a deal it was for her to refuse that order of the king. And then there's an interesting story right there, because you've got a bunch of your authoritarian patriarchal guys that'll tell you she wasn't being submissive to her husband, so maybe she's a terrible person. But also, he was not being a Christ-like leader and loving her like a husband should love. So, chicken or egg, who broke the vows first? I don't know. It's a sinful situation. It's not great. But I'm a little proud of Vashti for standing up for herself, even when she could have been beheaded. Basically, the king decides that he's going to have Vashti completely banished from the kingdom, and he's going to find a new queen that will hopefully do what he wants better or something, I guess. So, Vashti gets banished. She has to go away. She's not queen anymore. And so he basically decides to round up all the pretty young women. We call that kidnapping today. Round up all the pretty young women, dress them up in makeup and dresses, parade them out in front of himself.
He does have an objectifying women problem, doesn't he?
Rounds them all up and decides to pick a new queen out of the lineup. Now, the situation was a little more graphic than that. The way he chose his queen had to do with how they performed in other areas as well. But you can read the book for yourself and find that out. It's a tough time to be alive, right? These are hard truths. Sorry, I've got a family-friendly channel, so I have to be careful. But it was a pretty rough time to be a Jew living in 490 BC. Anyway, Esther ends up being picked to be the queen. Now, the cool thing here is Esther's in a terrible situation. A lot like most of the women we get to study on the Homegirl edition, Esther finds herself in a place that she might not want to be, that's pretty terrifying, around with a bunch of people who are very ungodly, very sinful, and they're not going to treat her respectfully. But through the situation that she's in, Esther and her uncle Mordecai have a front row seat to God using Esther to save all the Jewish people from an evil man named Haman while Esther was queen. She risked her neck for it. She went out on a limb in front of the king, risked everything she had to do what the Lord had her to do, but the Lord blessed it. And the Lord saved all the Jewish people through Esther and her uncle Mordecai, but basically through her bravery and standing up to an evil man who was convincing an evil king to do more evil stuff. Now, of course, I already told you the full story is in the book of Esther, which I would suggest to you as a book for some great reading this week. It won't take you that long to get through it, but you'll get to see a miraculous story of a brave woman who gets her own book in the Bible and saves all the Jews around her and is a tool in her maker's hands for part of his giant redemptive plan.